In the quiet of the night, we look up to the sky and see the moon, a symbol of mystery, beauty, and wonder. But what if the moon, the very thing that has watched over us for millennia, has begun to glitch? A fractured reality, distorting space and time itself, has started to show cracks. In tonight's chilling tale, we explore 10 disturbing stories where the moon is far from what we thought it was. Welcome to The Moon is Glitching, Disturbing Stories of a Broken Reality. Story 1. The Reverse Tides. It was one of those rare, peaceful evenings when the world seemed to hold its breath. The sky, tinged with the soft hues of twilight, stretched endlessly over the ocean. Mark and Sarah walked hand in hand along the beach, the cool breeze brushing their faces as they marveled at the beauty of the full moon rising in the distance. The moon's silver light spread across the surface of the water, casting a shimmering trail all the way to the horizon. For a moment, they forgot everything. The pressures of their daily lives, the worries that tugged at them, and the world that seemed to rush by. Instead, they stood together in silence, taking in the natural wonder before them. The rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore was calming, almost hypnotic, a lullaby of nature. But then, something strange happened. At first, it was subtle, too subtle to catch immediately, but soon it became undeniable. The tide, which should have been gently rising with the pull of the moon, began to recede. Slowly at first, the water began to retreat, as if the ocean was being drawn back, pulled away from the land. Mark squinted, thinking it was just an illusion, but Sarah noticed it too. "Mark, look at the water. It's going backward." At first, Mark thought it might just be the wind or the angle of the tide, but no, he was wrong. The sea wasn't advancing as it should. Instead, it was being sucked back into the abyss, moving at an unnatural pace. The sand beneath their feet began to expand, as though the water was being drawn into a vast vacuum. The footprints they left behind vanished, erased by the relentless pull of the ocean. It was as if the moon had lost control of its power, and the natural rhythm of the world had been broken. They stood frozen, unsure of what to do, staring in disbelief as the water stretched farther away from the shore, revealing parts of the seabed that had never been exposed before. It was a sight both beautiful and terrifying, as if they were witnessing something that should not exist. The horizon seemed to warp, bending in unnatural angles. The distant cliffs, usually so stable, now appeared to be floating, distorted and shimmering like a mirage in the heat. It was a reality that didn't make sense, but it was happening right before their eyes. But then, as if to punctuate the absurdity of it all, the moon began to act in a way it never had before. Sarah turned her gaze upward, her heart sinking when she realized that the moon was no longer where it should be. Instead of hanging high in the sky above them, its familiar face had drifted to the wrong side, hovering unnaturally low in the sky, casting an eerie reflection on the ocean below. It looked like a broken fragment of the moon, a shattered version that couldn't quite stay whole. Mark followed her gaze, his eyes widening with disbelief. It was as if the moon itself had fractured, and what remained was simply a shadow of its former self. The sky around them felt wrong too, like it had been painted in the wrong colors, as if someone had taken a brush and swiped across the heavens, leaving an unsettling stain. But it didn't stop there. the strange occurrence deepened. As if caught in some terrible loop, the tides reversed once more. The water that had retreated was now surging forward again, but this time with an even more intense force. It was as if the ocean were trying to regain control, to return to its rightful place. And yet, the tide didn't stop there. It surged back again, a third time, as if time itself was bending and twisting in ways that defied understanding. Mark and Sarah stood there, unable to make sense of what they were witnessing. Every wave that returned brought with it a deeper sense of unease. The water's unnatural movement made the air feel thick, as though the very atmosphere had grown heavier. The sensation of déjà vu was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, they felt like they were caught in some infinite loop, repeating the same moment over and over again. It was as though the ocean had forgotten where it belonged, trapped in a cycle of repetition that it couldn't escape from. Mark felt a cold shiver creep down his spine as the moon flickered again, its light distorting before it settled back into its usual position. Just as quickly as it had begun, the ocean returned to its normal rhythm. The waves resumed their steady rise and fall, lapping gently at the shore. The eerie stillness of the night seemed to settle back into place, and the landscape, though still shrouded in the glow of the moon, seemed to return to normal. But for Mark and Sarah, nothing felt normal anymore. The beach was the same, the ocean the same, and the moon was once again hanging silently above them. Yet, the world had shifted, and they could not shake the sense that something had broken, something they could never fully understand. They exchanged a silent glance, their minds racing to comprehend what had just happened. Had it been a glitch in reality? A strange twist in time? Or was something more sinister at play? Something that had altered their perception of the world, if only for a moment. As they left the beach, the memory of the reversed tides, the flickering moon, and the warped horizon haunted them. They couldn't shake the feeling that they had witnessed something impossible, something that went far beyond their understanding of the world. And as they walked away, they couldn't help but wonder, what if the moon, in all its quiet majesty, wasn't just a celestial body in the sky? What if it was a warning, a sign that reality itself was starting to crack, and the world was no longer as stable as it had once seemed? The question lingered, unanswered, as the night carried on, and the moon, in all its silence, continued to watch over them, forever altered, forever broken. Story 2. The Moon's Flicker. Lena had always found solace in the quiet hours of the night, her gaze fixed on the stars. The world was calmer then, as if time itself slowed, allowing her to escape the rush of daily life. Her favorite pastime was stargazing, spending hours with her telescope, studying the moon, planets, and the distant stars that dotted the sky. There was something deeply meditative about watching the vastness of space from her small window to the universe. One evening, as Lena settled into her chair, the familiar stillness of the night embraced her. The full moon hung high, casting a soft, silvery light that reflected off the surrounding trees. She adjusted her telescope and peered into its lens, eager to get a closer look at the cratered surface of the moon. But what she saw was not what she had expected. At first, it was just a flicker, like a light bulb trying to hold on to its last glow. The moon's surface shimmered, not in the steady glow she knew, but in an erratic, almost chaotic pattern. It looked as though the very essence of the moon was glitching, flickering like a faulty television screen struggling to maintain its signal. Lena's pulse quickened. Was it a trick of the light? Or was something happening to the moon itself? She leaned forward, her heart racing, trying to steady the trembling telescope. She had never seen anything like this before. It was as though the moon wasn't just reflecting light, it was malfunctioning. The surface of the moon, once smooth and familiar, seemed to warp and glitch, flashing in and out of clarity. It was as though the moon's very essence was stuttering, repeating moments, cutting in and out like a digital malfunction. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She wiped her eyes, thinking it might be a trick of her vision. But when she refocused, it was worse. The moon's surface was shifting as though it was no longer the physical object she had always known. It began to ripple, shimmering like liquid metal, as if some hidden force was tugging at its core. And then, it happened. For a fleeting moment, the moon's surface seemed to dissolve. The gray and white craters, the shadows she had studied for years, gave way to something completely unimaginable. Beneath the surface of the moon, Lena saw something impossible. The edges of the moon's rocky exterior seemed to fold away, revealing what appeared to be a sprawling, ancient city, an entire civilization built right under the surface. Lena's eyes widened in disbelief. Towering spires rose from the moon's surface, like forgotten monuments of a lost civilization. The city stretched into the distance, with winding roads and intricate buildings that seemed to glow faintly beneath the shifting moonlight. It was like something out of a dream or a nightmare. Her mind raced. The moon couldn't have cities. This wasn't possible. The moon had been a barren, desolate rock for as long as humanity had known it. But here it was, an entire city that shouldn't exist, hidden beneath the surface like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Lena blinked, hoping that her eyes were deceiving her. But no, this wasn't a trick of the light. She saw it clearly. There was a city on the moon, ancient and strange, its structures alien to anything she had ever imagined. For a brief moment, Lena felt as if she were gazing into another world, a world she had never known. The moon's surface seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as though the city beneath was alive, a relic of an ancient past, waiting to be discovered. She reached out to adjust the focus of the telescope, desperate to get a clearer view. But when she refocused the lens, the city was gone. The surface of the moon was once again just as it had always been, smooth, cratered, and cold. The shimmering light, the strange city, everything had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The moon's surface was back to normal, but Lena couldn't shake the haunting image of the city she had seen, those towering spires, the glowing roads, the strange sense that she had glimpsed something that was never meant to be seen. Her hands trembled as she pulled away from the telescope. The image was still burned into her mind, impossible to erase. What had she just witnessed? A glitch, a fleeting moment of another reality breaking through, or perhaps something far darker, something far older and more dangerous. Lena tried to rationalize what she had seen. It was just a glitch, right? The moon couldn't hide a city. It must have been some trick of the atmosphere, a mirage caused by the light, or some distortion in the lens. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how impossible it all seemed. Had she glimpsed a parallel universe? Or had the moon itself fractured in some way, revealing an alternate reality where ancient civilizations had once lived on its surface. A world that had long been forgotten. Lena's thoughts spiraled. She couldn't sleep that night. Her mind replayed the image over and over. The strange city on the moon, shimmering and fleeting, like a glitch in the fabric of reality itself. And she knew deep down that she couldn't unsee it. The question lingered in her mind. Was the moon hiding more than it let on? The next night, Lena returned to her telescope, her breath shallow as she stared up at the now calm moon. But no matter how hard she tried, the city didn't return. The surface was once again just a cold, lifeless orb in the sky. Still, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that the moon was hiding something, that what she had witnessed was just the tip of an ancient mystery. Was the moon malfunctioning, glitching in and out of realities? Or had she somehow been granted a brief glimpse into a hidden truth that had been buried for eons? Whatever it was, Lena couldn't stop herself from wondering. If the moon was hiding a city beneath its surface, what else was it hiding? And more terrifying still, what if she had just glimpsed something far darker than a forgotten civilization? Something that was never meant to be seen at all? Story 3. The Time Warp Eclipse. It was the kind of celestial event that captured the attention of millions, a rare solar eclipse. The type of astronomical phenomenon that stirs excitement and wonder in the hearts of all who witness it. Jason had been waiting for this moment for weeks, eagerly anticipating the darkening of the sky as the moon slowly began to cover the sun. He had heard about the event on the news, seen the hype on social media, and couldn't resist the temptation to experience it firsthand. He had his special glasses, his camera ready, and was set to witness the majesty of the universe unfold. As the first shadow of the moon crept over the sun, Jason found himself standing on the edge of a quiet hill, the warm evening breeze brushing his face. He marveled at the darkening sky, the world around him growing eerily still as the sunlight began to dim. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful, almost magical, as the moon's shadow slowly deepened, engulfing the sun. But then, something shifted in the air, something intangible yet powerful. Jason felt it, a sudden pull, as if he had been yanked into a different world altogether. He froze, his heart racing, his gaze fixed on the darkening sky. The light around him seemed to warp, and the air grew heavy, thick with a sense of something about to happen, something that was beyond anything he could have imagined. The eclipse was no longer just an event. It felt like a gateway, a door opening into something unknown, something he could neither comprehend nor control. The sky darkened in an almost unnatural way. The colors of the world shifted, taking on hues of deep purple and gray as if reality itself was shifting. The usual calmness of the moment dissolved, replaced by an overwhelming sense of disorientation, as though the universe had skipped a beat. Jason stumbled slightly, his vision blurry, and in that instant, something changed within him. He looked at his wristwatch. The hands of the clock, frozen then, began to move in reverse. Slowly, then faster, as if time itself had gone rogue. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The seconds ticked backward. It wasn't just a slight anomaly. It was as if time itself was unraveling. What was happening? Jason blinked, and then it hit him. The world around him had shifted, not just in appearance, but in its very essence. the space around him had bent. He could no longer tell if he was still in the present or if he had been swept into another version of reality altogether. In a dizzying moment of vertigo, Jason looked up and saw figures walking toward him, people from his past, faces he had thought long gone, lost to time. He saw his childhood friend, Mark, who had tragically passed away years ago in a car accident. He saw his grandmother, who had passed away when he was just a child. They walked right by him, completely unaware of his presence, as if they were part of another time, one that was playing out before him as if it were real. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He tried to call out to them, to warn them, to reach out, but they simply passed through him. There was no response, no recognition. It was as though they were ghosts, unaware of his existence, yet walking through the world as though nothing had changed. His mind reeled. He turned to follow them, but as he did, the world around him seemed to blur and flicker. The air crackled with energy. It was like witnessing a ripple in time, a tear in the fabric of the universe itself. Time seemed to loop, repeat, and then skip forward again, all in a matter of seconds. Jason's head spun as he watched fragments of his life play out before him, each one like a disconnected piece of a puzzle that had no solution. When the eclipse reached its peak, the sky darkened into a deep blackness. It was as if night had come early, as if the sun itself had disappeared into a void. Jason felt a cold shiver run down his spine, his skin tingling with an otherworldly energy. The figures from his past faded into the darkness, and he was left standing alone under a sky that no longer made sense. He looked up once more. Was he still here? Was he still in his world? Or had he slipped into another dimension, one where time and reality had fractured beyond repair? And then, in the blink of an eye, everything snapped back into place. The sun began to re-emerge from behind the moon, and the sky gradually returned to its normal state. The light softened once again, casting the world in a familiar glow. The eclipse had ended, but for Jason, nothing was the same. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, his mind struggling to make sense of the chaos he had just experienced. It felt as if an entire lifetime had passed in mere minutes, a lifetime of memories, confusion, and fleeting moments of unreality. But when he glanced around him, everything seemed normal again. The hill was still quiet. The air was still. The birds returned to their evening songs. It was as if nothing had happened at all. But there was one thing that Jason couldn't shake. As he stood there, trying to regain his bearings, he walked past a nearby window and caught a glimpse of his reflection. It wasn't his face staring back at him. It was someone older. A version of himself, aged, worn by time in a way that felt far too real. Jason's stomach dropped. It was him, but not. He reached a trembling hand to his face, hoping to shake the vision away, but the reflection remained unchanged. What was this? A glimpse of the future? A vision of what could have been? Or something more profound? Something that connected him to the very fabric of time itself? Was the eclipse merely a cosmic event, or had the moon opened a door to something deeper? Something far more incomprehensible than he could possibly imagine? Jason stood frozen, staring at his reflection. His mind raced with questions, none of which had answers. Had the eclipse fractured time itself? Had the moon somehow manipulated the flow of reality? The answers were just beyond his reach, hidden behind the veil of the eclipse's shadow. And as he stood there, caught between the past, present, and future, one thought lingered in his mind. What if the eclipse hadn't just been a cosmic event, but a glimpse into the cracks of reality itself? An opening, a warning that time could break, bend, and loop in ways humanity could never truly understand. Story 4. The Shadow Moon. It was a quiet, cold night when Miranda decided to take her usual late-night drive. The roads were empty, as they always were at this hour. The only sounds coming from the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The moon hung high above, casting its pale light across the landscape, bathing everything in a soft, silvery glow. But tonight, there was something different about it, a subtle oddness that tugged at the edges of Miranda's awareness. As she drove, her headlights illuminating the dark road ahead, Miranda noticed the way the moon's light seemed to stretch farther than usual, casting a shadow that looked almost unnatural. It wasn't just the usual dark spot on the ground that the moon created, but something more. The shadow seemed to stretch across the road, expanding in a way that didn't feel quite right. It was as if the very fabric of the world was being pulled along by its presence. Curious, Miranda squinted and glanced into the rearview mirror. There it was again, the shadow growing larger with every mile she drove. But it wasn't just a shadow. It was as though the moon itself was reaching out, creeping over the landscape like a dark, ethereal hand, its edges blurring and flickering as if it were unsure of its own form. She pressed down on the gas pedal, picking up speed, trying to outrun it. The shadow followed, growing larger and darker, as if it had a life of its own. With every turn she took, the shadow contorted itself, matching her every move, stretching and bending in ways that were far too unnatural to ignore. Miranda's heart began to race. She glanced nervously at the clock on the dashboard. The time seemed to stretch with each passing second, as if she had entered a moment that wasn't quite real. The familiar curve of the road ahead seemed to twist and warp in her vision, and the shadow in her rearview mirror grew, slowly but relentlessly, as though it was gaining on her, inch by inch. She tried to push the car faster, her eyes darting from the road to the shadow behind her. The moon was now casting an oppressive, inescapable presence over everything. It wasn't just following her, it was hunting her, as if it had become a creature of the night, a predator with no intention of letting its prey slip away. Suddenly, Miranda's car engine sputtered. She felt the car jerk beneath her, a strange, mechanical groan filling the air. Panic surged through her. She slammed her foot down harder on the accelerator, but the engine didn't respond. It stalled, then sputtered again. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to restart it. But the car refused to cooperate, the engine grinding uselessly. "Come on, come on," she muttered, desperately turning the key, but the car remained lifeless. Her breath came in sharp gasps as she turned to look at the shadow once more. It was no longer just a dark patch on the ground. It had begun to spread, expanding and twisting like tendrils reaching out from the moon itself. The shadow wrapped around the car like a living thing, curling up over the roof and sides, obscuring her vision. It was as if the very air had thickened with the moon's influence, pressing in on her from every direction. Miranda's grip tightened on the steering wheel as the shadow grew closer, its edges now touching the car, seeping into the very metal and glass, distorting the landscape around her. She felt her pulse racing as the world seemed to bend, the air thick with a sensation of suffocating weight. It was as though the moon wasn't just casting a shadow, it was pulling the world itself into the void, swallowing everything in its path. She looked out the windshield, her breath catching in her throat. The world around her was beginning to fade, as if being consumed by the shadow. The road ahead, once clearly visible, now seemed to dissolve into a black expanse that stretched far beyond her line of sight. The trees, the fields, the horizon, all of it was being drawn in, becoming part of the darkness that the moon had summoned. Miranda's chest tightened, her thoughts racing. This wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't a mere optical illusion. The moon was casting something far darker, far more powerful. The moon's shadow wasn't just an absence of light. It was an entity of its own, one that had the ability to manipulate the very fabric of reality. She realized with growing dread that this wasn't just a shadow. It was a glitch in the world, a terror in the boundary between what should be and what shouldn't. The shadow seemed to pulse, its edges flickering as if it were a projection failing to hold its form. Yet the closer it got, the more real it became, more like a living, breathing thing than an inanimate absence of light. Miranda's mind raced. Had the moon itself fractured, becoming a harbinger of something terrible? Something that existed beyond the realms of human understanding? With her heart in her throat, Miranda slammed her foot against the brake, but the car refused to move, trapped in the expanding dark. The shadow now seemed to engulf everything, her car, her body, her very soul. Her thoughts were no longer her own. It was as if the shadow had begun to take hold of her mind, erasing the boundary between herself and the void it brought. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the shadow stopped. The world around her flickered, like a broken image on a screen. The engine roared back to life with a jolt, and the moon, which had seemed to dominate everything, was once again just a distant light in the sky. The road was clear, the trees undisturbed, and the moon's glow, though still unsettling, had returned to its usual, passive state. But Miranda wasn't the same. Her hands still gripped the wheel, but her knuckles were pale from the force. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she tried to process what had just happened. Had it all been some strange dream? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion? Or had something far darker occurred? Something that she couldn't begin to understand. As she drove home, the moon hung in the sky, casting its familiar light. But now, Miranda knew better. She knew that the moon had shown her something far more terrifying than she could ever have imagined. And as she drove, she realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach that the moon wasn't just a watcher in the sky. It was an orchestrator, a force beyond her comprehension, one that had the power to break the very fabric of reality. And as Miranda glanced at the rearview mirror, she saw it again, just for a fleeting moment, the shadow stretching unnaturally, following her through the darkened world. The moon was watching her. The moon was always watching. Story 5. The Silent Moon. Ben had always found comfort in the quiet solitude of the night. He was a night owl by nature, someone who thrived when the world was asleep, when the sounds of daily life fell away, and the night unfolded into its own peaceful rhythm. The night held a kind of calmness, a peaceful stillness that he couldn't quite find during the day. It was in the solitude of the night that his thoughts felt clearer, and the world seemed simpler. On this particular night, the air was unusually still. The kind of silence that made everything feel heightened, like the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Ben sat on his porch, gazing at the sky above. The moon, as it always did, hung in the heavens, casting its familiar silver light across the land, illuminating the trees and grass with a soft, gentle glow. But tonight, something was different. Something in the air felt off, as though the very fabric of reality had shifted just slightly. At first, it was so faint that Ben thought he was imagining it. He sat back in his chair, letting the night's cool air wash over him, when he heard it, a soft hum. It was barely audible, like the far-off sound of a distant melody carried on the breeze. Ben frowned. He glanced around, wondering if it was just the wind rustling through the trees or perhaps the distant hum of city traffic. But the sound persisted, low and rhythmic, almost ethereal in its tone. He leaned forward, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. That's when he realized it wasn't the wind. It was coming from the moon. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure how he knew, but somehow he could tell. The hum wasn't just a natural sound. It was deeper, almost alive in a way that he couldn't quite describe. The frequency of the sound began to grow, vibrating through the stillness of the night, and the air seemed to shimmer with its resonance. Curiosity piqued. Ben stood up and walked out into the open, staring up at the moon. The once calm celestial body now seemed to pulse with life, glowing more brightly as the hum intensified. The very sky around him seemed to warp with the sound, as if the universe itself was bending to the rhythm. The moon didn't just shine. It vibrated, its glow pulsating in time with the sound, growing stronger with each beat. As the humming reached its peak, something extraordinary happened. Time itself seemed to slow. The soft rustling of the trees, the distant chirping of crickets, the hum of a passing car, everything stopped. The air, which had been filled with life just moments ago, now stood still, frozen in place. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ben stood motionless, heart racing, as the world around him fell into a surreal silence. It was as if the entire universe had paused, as if the moment was suspended outside of time. He could feel it, an overwhelming, deep vibration running through his body, as if the pulse of the moon was now within him, syncing with his own heartbeat. It was like he was connected to something far greater than himself. The sensation was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. And then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the humming changed. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It became voices. Faint, distant voices, layered and overlapping, as though they were speaking to him from a place far beyond the reach of earthly sound. The voices weren't physical. They didn't come through his ears in the traditional sense. It was as if they were speaking directly into his mind, bypassing everything he knew about sound and perception. Ben's heart hammered in his chest as he tried to listen, to understand. The voices were not clear at first. He could hear only fragments, words that felt like echoes from a distant, forgotten place. Come closer. The time is near. You're not alone. Each phrase carried a weight, as though it was a message meant just for him, meant to be heard by only one person in the entire world. The voice was calm, soothing, but it chilled him to the core. The voices seemed to be coming from the moon itself, as if the moon had become a sentient being, trying to communicate something important. Ben's thoughts spun. The world around him felt like it was fading, dissolving into the background. All he could focus on were the voices. He wanted to understand, to make sense of it, but the words were growing fainter, harder to decipher, and seemed to reach a crescendo of intensity that left his mind reeling. Then, just as abruptly as the voices had started, the sound stopped. The moon's glow returned to its usual quiet radiance. Time resumed. The trees rustled again. The air filled with the sounds of the night once more. The world was back to normal, but Ben felt different. The serenity of the night had evaporated, leaving a strange, unsettling void in its place. He looked around, trying to process what had just happened. The moon was still high above him, shining softly as it always did, but it no longer felt like the same moon. It felt distant, alien, as if it had just given him a glimpse of something far more profound than he was ready to comprehend. Ben stepped back, shaking his head as if trying to dispel the confusion. His breath came in shallow gasps. The voices had stopped, but they hadn't left him. They lingered in his mind, echoing in the deepest corners of his consciousness, like whispers that refused to fade. As the night wore on, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in his thoughts. The voices from the moon had embedded themselves into his mind, and no matter how hard he tried to push them away, they refused to leave. Was the moon trying to send him a message, or was it something far darker, something beyond human understanding? The more Ben thought about it, the more he realized that he was now part of something he couldn't fully grasp. He wasn't the only one hearing the voices. He couldn't be. The moon's hum had called out to him, but who else had heard it? What else had the moon tried to say? Ben couldn't answer these questions. All he knew was that the moon's silent hum had awakened something inside him, something that would forever change the way he looked at the night sky. Story 6. The Phantom Moon. Ella had always loved the quiet beauty of a stormy night. The rain, the wind, and the occasional flash of lightning. There was something raw and alive about the way nature seemed to be in motion. She didn't mind walking home in the rain, the soft patter of droplets against the ground soothing her mind after a long day. But tonight, something felt different. The storm had intensified as she walked, the thunder rumbling in the distance, and the wind whipping around her. The heavy clouds above had painted the night in a blanket of darkness, but as she turned a corner, something unusual happened. The clouds parted, just enough to reveal a sliver of light. At first, she thought it was a trick of the storm, a break in the clouds. But then, she saw it, the moon. Except, this wasn't the moon she knew. Its usual silvery white glow had been replaced by a faint, unnatural purple hue. It wasn't a bright, serene light, but a dim, sickly light that seemed to pulse with a strange, eerie energy. It wasn't a moon she had ever seen before. Something was terribly wrong. Ella's heart began to race, her steps faltering as she stared up at it. The light flickered every few seconds, like a faulty street lamp that couldn't decide whether to shine or go out completely. The moon's reflection shimmered on the wet pavement beneath her feet, but each flicker distorted it, bending the light in unnatural ways. It wasn't just a reflection. It was as though the very essence of the moon had become a a shadow of its true self. She shook her head, telling herself it was just the storm playing tricks on her eyes. The wind howled again, and the moon flickered once more violently this time. As she blinked, she saw something else. Her own shadow, her own reflection, wasn't right. It wasn't following her movements. It was moving independently, walking opposite her in strange, jerky steps. Her heart skipped a beat. As she stood still, her shadow continued to pace back and forth, mimicking her movements, but twisting them into something darker. It paused when she moved, as if waiting, before it continued to shift on its own accord, now standing at odd angles, stretching unnaturally across the ground. Ella's hands trembled, and she hurried forward, trying to ignore the sense of dread creeping up her spine. But the phantom moon's light followed her. Each flicker was accompanied by a new, subtle change in her surroundings. The pools of light that appeared on the ground, where there had been none moments before, seemed to be real, yet unreal at the same time. Her feet seemed to sink into the light, as if it were a different dimension beneath her, a world out of sync with her own. The ground beneath her felt different. The air was thick and heavy, pressing against her skin, as though the very atmosphere had become unstable. She could hear her own footsteps, but it felt like someone else was walking with her, stepping in time with her, but also a beat behind. Every time she glanced back, her shadow was there, always ahead of her, always in the wrong direction. With each flicker of the phantom moon, something else happened. The world seemed to break apart. She passed beneath street lamps that glowed a faint, sickly yellow, but when the moon flickered, the light would warp, casting dark, elongated shadows that twisted and stretched unnaturally. She looked to her left, and there, in the pool of light, was another version of herself. Her reflection in the light wasn't just a simple copy of her. It was a distorted version. Some versions of her were smiling an unnatural, wide grin that stretched too far across her face. Others were weeping silently, their eyes hollow, drained of life. Some versions stood frozen, their faces vacant, as if lost in a trance. But no matter what form they took, they all stared back at her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. She quickened her pace, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that gripped her chest. But the further she walked, the more the world around her seemed to collapse. The sidewalks began to twist into spirals, the trees bending and warping as if they were being torn at the edges by some unseen force. The air was thick with a pressure she couldn't explain, and every time she glanced at her own shadow, it would be in a different place, moving on its own, casting strange, jagged shapes on the pavement. Her thoughts began to race. Was this real? Was she seeing things? Her mind screamed at her to wake up, to snap out of it. But the feeling of something wrong clung to her, more tangible than anything she could rationalize. The phantom moon's glow seemed to grow stronger, more oppressive, until it felt like the entire world was wrapped in its sickly light. Every flicker of its glow pulled her deeper into this distorted reality. With every blink, the moon would warp, its edges flickering like a broken image, unable to maintain its form. Ella stumbled, her breath quickening as the world around her seemed to fracture further. The alternate versions of herself, some standing, some smiling, some crying, followed her every move, their eyes locked onto hers. She felt as if they were trying to tell her something, trying to pull her into their world, into whatever reality this was. Finally, as Ella reached the end of her street, she looked up at the sky once more. The storm had begun to recede, and the clouds parted, the moon flickering one last time before it vanished. It was as if the phantom moon had never existed, as though it had been nothing more than a figment of her imagination, a trick of the light. But Ella wasn't sure she believed that. The feeling of unease lingered in her mind. Her own shadow still felt wrong, still moved on its own, still mimicked her actions in eerie silence. The images of the alternate versions of herself, those hollow-eyed reflections, haunted her thoughts. She tried to convince herself it had all been some illusion, a momentary glitch in her perception caused by the storm. But deep down, she couldn't shake the question. What had she seen? Was it a glitch in time? Or had something far darker, far more sinister, been watching her from afar? And if so, was it gone for good? Or had the phantom moon just been a glimpse into something more terrifying, something that was still out there, waiting for her? Story 7. The Moon's Silent Warning. It was the perfect night for camping, one of those crisp, clear nights when the stars seemed to shine brighter than usual, and the air was cool but not too cold. Jake and his friends had set up camp deep in the woods, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The only sounds were the crackling of their campfire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. They were excited, eager to relax and enjoy the peace of the wilderness. But as the night unfolded, something unusual caught their attention. The full moon hung high above them, casting its silver light across the clearing. It had always been a comforting sight, a constant in the vast expanse of the night sky. But tonight, there was something wrong with it, something Jake couldn't immediately place. It started as a subtle change, barely noticeable at first. The moon's light, which had always been steady and unwavering, began to pulse in a rhythmic pattern. A gentle, almost imperceptible throb, like a heartbeat coming from the sky itself. At first, Jake thought it was his imagination. He looked around at his friends, wondering if they had noticed it too. They were all staring up at the moon, their faces illuminated by its soft glow. But it wasn't just the moon. Everything around them seemed to be responding to the pulse. The leaves on the trees, normally still under the quiet night, began to sway, not in response to any wind, but in perfect synchrony with the moon's beat. It was as though the entire world was breathing in time with the celestial body. "Do you guys feel that?" Jake asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, as if the night itself were holding its breath. One of his friends, Mark, looked up from his phone. "Yeah, it's weird," he said, a nervous edge creeping into his voice. "The moon looks off, like it's alive." Jake wasn't sure if it was the effect of the night, the quiet around them, or something more, but a sense of unease began to settle in his stomach. The pulsing was growing more intense, more pronounced. The trees around them seemed to sway in a way that didn't feel natural, as if the very air was vibrating with energy. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, a chill running down his spine. He reached for his phone, hoping to distract himself, but as his fingers brushed the screen, his phone glitched. The screen flickered rapidly, flashing with strange, distorted colors before going completely black. He shook it, pressing the buttons, but nothing worked. It was as if his phone had just died. His friends' phones did the same, their screens flashing erratically before going dark. "What the hell?" Mark muttered, flipping through his phone, trying to get it to turn on again. "This is insane." Jake felt a sense of dread coil tightly in his chest. It wasn't just his phone. It was something larger, something wrong with the night itself. He looked up again, and that's when he saw it. The moon was getting larger, closer. It seemed to grow, its silvery light expanding outward, stretching toward them like a darkened tide creeping across the sky. The rhythmic pulse was louder now, vibrating the very air around them. With each pulse, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble slightly, like a distant, yet undeniable force was awakening beneath them. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking as she looked up at the moon. "It's like it's reaching for us." Jake couldn't answer. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. The low hum of the moon's pulse filled the air now, a sound so deep and resonant that it almost felt like it was inside him, rattling his bones. The ground trembled more intensely, the vibrations getting stronger with every passing second. He felt an inexplicable pull as if the earth itself was shifting, groaning under the weight of something immense. "We need to leave," Jake said suddenly, his voice rising with panic. He turned, looking for the path back to their campsite, but when he did, something was wrong. The familiar trees, the edge of the clearing, had vanished. In their place was an endless void of darkness, stretching out beyond their sight, swallowing the forest whole. "What the hell is this?" Mark shouted, backing up, his eyes wide with fear. The path had disappeared completely, and the void before them seemed to expand, as if they were trapped in some kind of alternate reality, unable to escape. The trees around them, once quiet and serene, seemed to whisper, their rustling leaves now sounding like urgent warnings, but the words were indecipherable, lost in the rising hum of the moon. The moon pulsed again, louder now, its light blinding as it grew even larger, closer still, stretching its tendrils of light like an inescapable force. The ground trembled again, a low rumble that made the earth feel like it was shifting beneath them, threatening to swallow them whole. "We have to get out of here," Sarah screamed, her voice frantic as she looked around, desperately searching for any sign of safety. But the void remained. It wasn't just the path that had disappeared. The entire world around them seemed to be unraveling. The stars, once so bright and steady, flickered in and out of existence. The forest, the moon, the very air around them, it all felt like it was slipping away, as though reality itself was being torn apart. Jake felt his heart race. "What is this? What's happening?" he shouted, but his voice seemed to be swallowed by the hum. The moon's pulse continued to grow, its rhythm now shaking the earth beneath them, vibrating through every part of their bodies. His head spun, his thoughts were a blur of fear and confusion. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The hum, the trembling, the shifting reality, all of it vanished. The moon, once so unnaturally close, now hung high in the sky, its glow steady and unchanged. The trees stood still again, the air was calm, and the path that had once been swallowed by darkness had returned, as though nothing had happened at all. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The moon, though now silent, still held a strange weight in his mind, as if it had just delivered a warning they couldn't fully understand. It had pulsed with a rhythm, a message, a force far beyond their comprehension. The calmness of the night felt off now, as though the world had come too close to unraveling. "We're leaving," Jake said quietly, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of fear. He didn't look back at the moon. His friends didn't say anything as they gathered their things and started walking, their steps quick and unsure. The path was quiet now, normal again, but Jake's mind refused to calm. The moon had pulsed, had warned them, but the message, whatever it had been, was lost in the silence. They had been too late to understand it. As they walked away, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the moon had just shown them something they were never meant to see, something that had only given them a brief glimpse of the fragility of their reality. And that, perhaps, was the true warning. They might not have understood it now, but one day they would. Story 8. The Moon's Message. Maria had always found comfort in the moon's peaceful glow. Every evening, as dusk settled into the quiet of the night, she would take a moment to sit by her window, gazing up at the celestial body. The moon had always been a constant, a quiet presence in the night sky that brought her a sense of calm. Its steady, silvery light made the world below feel more serene, more connected. The quiet hum of the night, the distant rustle of the wind, and the soft glow of the moon, everything in her life felt anchored to that rhythm. But on this particular evening, something was different. As Maria sat by her window, staring at the moon as she had done so many times before, she noticed a subtle shift. The moon, which had always appeared so calm and reassuring, now seemed different. There was a faint, almost imperceptible flicker in the air, like static on an old television screen. For a moment, Maria wondered if it was just her imagination, but the longer she stared, the stronger the sensation grew. Then, it started, soft at first, like a whisper on the wind. A voice, distant and faint, slipped through the stillness of the night. It was barely audible, and at first, Maria thought she was hearing things. But as she leaned closer to the window, the voice grew clearer, a low, eerie hum that seemed to vibrate in the air around her. "The end is coming." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She blinked, recoiling slightly from the window. The voice echoed in her mind, repeating the words with a chilling clarity. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the moon, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Could she be dreaming? Was this just some strange hallucination brought on by stress? She stepped back from the window, her hands trembling slightly. She tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping over her. It couldn't be real. The moon was just the moon. There was nothing to fear. But then, as she glanced back up, the voice was there again. This time, louder, more urgent. "Time is collapsing. Save yourselves." Her pulse quickened. The words weren't just a whisper anymore. They were a command, an undeniable plea that reverberated through her mind. Maria's body stiffened as her mind struggled to comprehend the impossible message. Save yourselves? What was this? Who was speaking to her? And why the moon? Why now? Without thinking, Maria rushed to warn her family. She hurried down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. But as she moved, the words kept swirling in her mind. The message felt real, not like a dream, but like something more, something that shouldn't exist in this world. She reached her family's room, but as she opened the door, she froze. Her voice caught in her throat. Something was wrong. Her body went cold as she realized that the moon, had changed. She rushed back to the window, her heart pounding in her chest. What she saw made her blood run cold. The peaceful, glowing orb she had always admired was no longer the same. The surface of the moon, once smooth and steady, now appeared marred, like something had torn at it. A strange symbol had appeared across its face, etched into the lunar surface in an intricate pattern. The symbol was unlike anything Maria had ever seen before. Swirling lines, looping arcs, and geometric shapes that seemed to pulse and shift with an eerie life of their own. She gasped, her hands shaking as she gripped the windowsill for support. The symbol wasn't static. It was moving, shifting, alive, as if the moon itself was trying to tell her something that was beyond her understanding. The lines twisted and distorted with each passing second, growing more complex, more tangled, as if the moon was unraveling before her eyes. Maria's breath came in shallow gasps. What was happening? The moon had never been like this before. It had always been steady, calm. But now, it felt like it was glitching, like its very existence was breaking apart, the surface distorting with every flicker, as though reality itself were cracking. She stared in disbelief as the symbol on the moon seemed to pulse with a strange, rhythmic pattern, in perfect synchrony with the same eerie hum she had heard earlier. The air around her seemed to vibrate with the pulse, as if the very atmosphere were caught in the rhythm of the moon. The room began to feel colder, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch unnaturally. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this?" But the moon didn't answer. It didn't need to. The symbol continued to change, twisting into ever more elaborate shapes, while the voice echoed in her mind once more. This time, it was louder, more forceful, as if it were trying to break through the barrier between her world and the one beyond. "It is too late. The collapse has begun." Maria's knees buckled beneath her, and she sank down onto the floor. The words reverberated through her mind, and the world outside the window seemed to warp and shimmer in response. The moon, no longer a calming presence, felt like something alien, something far more dangerous. It was as though the very fabric of reality had shifted, and the moon was no longer just a celestial body. It was a harbinger of something darker. In a panic, Maria grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she tried to reach her family. But the screen glitched, flickering and distorting before going completely black. Her heart raced. The moon was no longer just talking to her. It was changing everything around her. With one final, deafening pulse, the moon's symbol twisted into a chaotic tangle of lines, almost like a warning sign, before it disappeared, vanishing from the sky. The moon returned to its normal, familiar glow. The pulse stopped. The hum fell silent. The room was still again, the world quiet as it had always been. But Maria wasn't the same. The air felt different now, heavier, as if something had been altered in her very perception of reality. Her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. Was the moon trying to warn her? Was it trying to communicate something to her, something important? Or had it merely been a sign of something far worse? something beyond her understanding. The words still echoed in her mind. Time is collapsing. Save yourselves. But it was too late. The moon had spoken, and its message had been received. But was it already too late to act?